The first well died on the night of the harvest moon. Elder Marius discovered it at dawn, the water that had sustained the eastern ridge pack for 3 centuries now black as tar, reeking of corruption that made even the strongest wolves recoil in disgust. Within hours, 12 pack members lay convulsing in the healing wards, their bodies rejecting the poison, but their wolves retreating deep within, whimpering in a terror no one had seen before. This was not a natural contamination. This was an attack, deliberate and cruel, striking at the very heart of what kept the werewolf kingdom alive. Water was sacred to their kind, blessed by the moon herself, and to poison it was not merely murder, but blasphemy of the highest order. Alpha King Theron Nightshade stood in his war room as reports flooded in throughout that terrible day. His jaw clenched so tightly his beta Marcus could hear teeth grinding from across the massive oak table. Theron was a king forged in conflict, having taken the throne at 23 when his father fell to a rival pack's challenge, and in the 15 years since, he had brought unprecedented unity to the fractured werewolf territories. He was known for his strategic mind, his unwavering sense of justice, and a control over his wolf that bordered on supernatural. At 6'5" with silver-streaked black hair despite his relative youth, eyes that shifted between storm gray and gold depending on how close his wolf ran to the surface, Theron commanded respect through presence alone. But now, as he studied the map before him with red markers indicating the poisoned well, he felt something he rarely allowed himself to experience: genuine fear for his people. The Eastern Ridge contamination would have been catastrophic enough on its own, but 3 days later, the Northern Vale well showed the same corruption. Then, the Western Hollow. A pattern emerged that chilled Theron to his core. Someone was systematically targeting the kingdom's water sources, and they had intimate knowledge of which wells served the largest populations, which were most critical to survival. This was not the work of rogue wolves or external enemies. This conspiracy originated from within, from someone who had access to protected information known only to the Alpha King's inner circle and the regional pack leaders. The realization that he had been betrayed by those closest to him ignited a cold fury in Theron that his wolf echoed with a snarl that rattled the windows of the war room. If you are captivated by stories of betrayal, justice, and supernatural romance, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling werewolf tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Marcus spread intelligence reports across the table, his expression grim as he highlighted key findings. The Northern Vale incident had occurred exactly 48 hours after a council meeting where well protection protocols were discussed. The Western Hollow poisoning happened the night after regional alphas received updated security schedules. Someone in the command structure was either the traitor or feeding information to them, and with each passing day, more lives hung in the balance. Theron's network of scouts and spies worked around the clock, but the perpetrator remained frustratingly elusive, always one step ahead, always striking when defenses were momentarily lowered. The king knew he needed to act decisively before panic turned to chaos, before his people lost faith, not just in his ability to protect them, but in the very bonds that held the kingdom together. It was Marcus who first suggested bringing in specialist help, someone whose gifts went beyond typical werewolf abilities. He spoke of rumors from the southern territories, whispers of an Omega healer named Lyra Ashwood, whose talents with toxins and poisons were considered almost mystical. She came from the Silverbrook Pack, a small, remote community that had always kept to themselves, producing some of the finest healers in the kingdom, despite their distance from the political center. According to the reports, Lyra could detect poisons through touch alone, could sense contamination in water sources from remarkable distances, and had saved her own pack from a mysterious illness 3 years prior, when no other healer could identify the cause. Theron was skeptical at first, having learned through hard experience that rumors often exceeded reality, but desperation made him willing to consider options he would normally dismiss. If this Omega truly possessed such gifts, she might be the key to not only identifying the poison, but tracking its source before more wells were destroyed. The summons was sent that very evening, carried by Theron's fastest messenger wolves, with the royal seal that demanded immediate compliance. Theron knew he was essentially conscripting this healer, pulling her from her home and pack without much choice in the matter. But he could not afford politeness when his kingdom was under attack. Every hour of delay meant more potential victims, more corrupted water sources, more ground gained by an enemy who remained maddeningly invisible. He told himself he would compensate her generously, ensure her pack was protected in her absence. But the truth was that being Alpha King sometimes meant making decisions that weighed the needs of thousands against the preferences of one. It was a burden he had carried for 15 years, and it never got lighter. Lyra Ashwood received the royal summons while tending to old Miriam's arthritis, her hands glowing with the soft silver light that marked her healing gift in action. She was a small woman by werewolf standards, barely 5'4", with long auburn hair. She kept braided for practical purposes, and eyes that shifted between green and gold depending on the light. At 26, she had already established herself as Silverbrook's primary healer, having trained under her grandmother until the elder woman's passing 2 years ago. Lyra's gift was indeed rare, an ability to sense the molecular structure of substances through physical contact, to feel the wrongness in corrupted materials as clearly as others might smell smoke. It was a talent that made her invaluable to her small pack, but also set her apart, made her different in ways that some found unsettling. Omegas with powerful gifts often faced complicated social dynamics, caught between the respect their abilities earned and the limitations their designation imposed. Reading the king's summons, Lyra felt a mixture of trepidation and responsibility wash over her. She had heard the rumors of the well poisonings, everyone had, and her healer's heart ached for the victims, even as her mind recoiled from the implications of such an attack. To poison the sacred wells was to wage war against the moon herself, against everything their kind held holy. If her gifts could help stop this horror, how? Could she refuse, even if it meant leaving the safety of her isolated pack for the dangerous politics of the royal court? Her alpha, Thomas Silverbrook, was reluctant to let her go, but recognized the command for what it was, not a request, but an order backed by the full authority of the throne. Within 2 days, Lyra found herself traveling north toward the capital with an escort of royal guards, her small bag of healing supplies and herbs, her only familiar comfort as she journeyed into an unknown future. The capital city of Moonhaven sprawled across a valley blessed with natural hot springs and ancient forests, a gleaming jewel of stone and timber that housed over 50,000 werewolves from dozens of integrated packs. The royal palace dominated the northern ridge, a magnificent structure of white granite and dark wood that seemed to grow from the mountain itself, its towers reaching toward the sky as if in perpetual worship of the moon. Lyra had never seen anything so grand. In her entire life, had never imagined that werewolves could build something that rivaled the majesty of nature itself. The guards led her through corridors lined with tapestries depicting the kingdom's history, past great battles and legendary alphas, the weight of centuries pressing down on her with each step. She felt profoundly out of place in her simple traveling clothes, aware of the curious and sometimes dismissive glances from palace staff who could scent her Omega status immediately. She was brought directly to the war room where Alpha King Theron was coordinating the crisis response with his advisors. And the moment Lyra stepped through those heavy doors, she felt the impact of his presence like a physical force. The king stood at the head of the table studying maps and reports, and when he looked up to assess his newly arrived healer, their eyes met in a moment that seemed to stretch beyond normal time. Lyra felt her wolf stir in a way it never had before. A recognition that bypassed logic and went straight to instinct, whispering words she did not want to hear. Mate. Impossible. Omega healers did not find their destined mates in Alpha Kings. Such pairings existed only in fairy tales told to pups, not in the harsh reality of pack hierarchies and political marriages. She forced the feeling down, buried it deep, and dropped into a respectful bow that hid the confusion surely written across her face. Theron experienced his own moment of disorientation when the called, small Omega entered his war room, her scent of wild jasmine and rain-washed stone cutting through the stress stench that had permeated the space for days. His wolf, usually so controlled and disciplined, surged forward with an intensity that shocked him, flooding his system with a recognition he had long since given up hoping to feel. In 15 years as king and 10 more before that, Theron had never encountered his true mate, had resigned himself to eventually selecting a suitable political match who could provide heirs and strengthen alliances. He had witnessed the mate bond in others, had seen how it transformed ordinary wolves into something more, but had accepted it would likely never be his fate. Now, staring at this auburn-haired healer who barely reached his chest in height, his entire world tilted on its axis. Every instinct screamed at him to go to her, to claim her, to protect her from everything, including the danger he himself was about to place her in. Instead, he remained rooted in place, alpha control wrestling with wolf instinct, and managed a greeting that came out far more formal than he intended. The briefing that followed was awkward in ways none of the other attendees could quite understand. A strange tension between king and healer that Marcus noted with raised eyebrows and knowing looks. Theron explained the situation with clinical precision, detailing each poisoning incident, the symptoms and victims, the consistent markers across all. Contaminated wells. He laid out what his investigators had discovered, which was frustratingly little beyond confirming the same unknown toxin appeared in each case. Lyra listened with intense focus, her analytical mind already sorting through possibilities, comparing what she heard to her extensive knowledge of natural and unnatural poisons. When Theron finally asked if she believed she could identify the substance, she met his gaze directly with a confidence that sent another jolt through the ew. Mate Bond neither was acknowledging and stated that she would need to examine the contaminated water directly, to touch it, and let her gift reveal what conventional analysis could not. That evening, Lyra was escorted to the palace healing ward, where sealed containers of the poisoned water were kept under heavy guard. She had requested privacy for the examination, needing to enter the deep meditative state her gift required, without the distraction of observers. But Theron had insisted on being present. As king, he claimed he needed to witness her process firsthand, but the truth neither spoke aloud was that his wolf absolutely refused to let its newly discovered mate interact with dangerous toxins without him there to protect her. They stood in the examination room, an uncomfortable silence between them, as Lyra prepared her workspace, laying out crystals that helped focus her gift and lighting candles made from purifying herbs. She explained that her ability worked through resonance, that she would essentially become temporarily attuned to the molecular structure of the poison, experiencing it at a level that sometimes caused physical reactions. The process could be painful, could leave her temporarily incapacitated, but it was the only way to gain the information they needed. Drop a comment below telling us what you think the poison's true purpose might be, and do not forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next supernatural romance story. Theron watched as Lyra removed the seal from the first container, her hands already beginning to glow with that soft silver light he had heard described, but never witnessed. She dipped her fingers into the blackened water, and immediately her entire body went rigid, eyes rolling back as her gift activated fully. For several terrifying seconds she remained frozen, and Theron had to physically restrain his wolf from interfering, knowing instinctively that breaking her concentration now could be dangerous. Then, Lyra gasped and pulled back, her legs giving out so that she would have collapsed if Theron had not moved with supernatural speed to catch her. He held her trembling form against his chest, feeling the racing of her heart, breathing in her scent mixed now with the acrid tang of whatever she had just experienced. For a moment they stayed like that, healer and king, two people fighting a bond neither had asked for but could no longer deny. When Lyra could speak again, her voice was shaky but determined as she described what her gift had revealed. The poison was not natural, not derived from any plant or mineral found in their territories. It was something created, alchemically forged with both physical components and dark magic, designed specifically to corrupt the moon-blessed properties of the sacred wells. Worse, the magical signature woven into the toxin felt familiar in a way that made her stomach turn, reminiscent of old dark practices that had supposedly been eradicated centuries ago when the kingdom was first unified. This was not just poisoning, it was a ritual corruption, each contaminated well serving as a node in some larger working that she could sense but not yet fully understand. The people behind this were not merely trying to kill werewolves. They were attempting to sever the mystical connection between the packs and the moon herself, to transform them into something less than what they were meant to be. Theron felt cold fury settle into his bones as he processed Lyra's findings. Dark magic had been outlawed in the kingdom for good reason. Its practice punishable by death, after the horrors of the Sundering Wars nearly destroyed their civilization 400 years ago. The fact that someone was not only using it but targeting the sacred wells meant this conspiracy went deeper than he had imagined, involved knowledge that should have been lost to time, and possessed resources that suggested powerful backing. He needed to identify the traitors immediately, but standard interrogations would take too long and give the conspirators time to strike again or go to ground. There was one option available to him, an ancient law he had hoped never to invoke. But desperate times demanded desperate measures. He would call for a trial by Moonfire, a judgment so severe and final that even considering it made his heart heavy with the responsibility. The announcement of the trial by Moonfire sent shockwaves through the kingdom. It had not been invoked in over 2 centuries, not since the reign of Alpha King Aldrich the Just, and its reputation was both feared and respected in equal measure. The trial was simple in concept, but brutal in execution. All suspects would be brought before the full moon at the sacred circle, bound by silver chains that prevented transformation, and subjected to the moon's judgment directly. Moonfire was a manifestation of the moon goddess's power, silver flames that would consume those guilty of blasphemy against the sacred laws while leaving the innocent untouched. There was no appeal, no second chance, no possibility of error, because the judgment came not from fallible wolves, but from the divine source of their very nature. It was justice in its purest and most terrifying form, and Theron knew that calling for it would mark his reign forever, for better or worse. Identifying the suspects to face trial proved both easier and more heartbreaking than Theron anticipated. Working with Hagi, Lyra's insights about the poison's magical signature and cross-referencing them with access logs, travel records, and intelligence reports, a pattern emerged that pointed towards several high-ranking members of his court. Lord Brennan, his finance minister for 8 years, whose family had served the crown for generations. Lady Cordelia, master of the royal archives, whose knowledge of ancient texts was unparalleled. Commander Victor of the Eastern Legions, a warrior Theron had fought beside in numerous conflicts and considered a friend. Each name on the list felt like a dagger to his heart. Each arrest he ordered a personal betrayal that cut deep. But the evidence was undeniable, and his duty to the kingdom had to outweigh his personal feelings no matter how much it cost him. The accused protested their innocence with varying degrees of conviction, some with genuine seeming shock, and others with carefully crafted outrage that rang hollow to Theron's experienced ears. Lord Brennan wept, openly, swearing on his ancestors that he had served loyally and would never betray the crown. Lady Cordelia maintained a cold dignity, stating that truth would vindicate her regardless of what false evidence had been manufactured. Commander Victor said nothing at all, his warrior's face an impassive mask that gave away nothing of his thoughts or feelings. Theron wanted desperately to believe in their innocence, wanted the trial to prove he had made a terrible mistake, but Lyra's gift had been too specific, and the pattern of evidence too damning. Someone among his inner circle had committed the ultimate betrayal, and the Moonfire would reveal who when the next full moon rose in 3 days' time. During those 3 days of preparation, Lyra remained at the palace conducting further investigations of the contaminated wells and working with healers to treat the victims who continued to struggle with the poison's lingering effects. She and Theron found themselves drawn together repeatedly, coordinating the crisis response serving as excuse for proximity that both needed, but neither would openly acknowledge. The mate bond was growing stronger, impossible to ignore, a constant hum of awareness whenever they were near each other. Late one evening, working alone in the archive room searching for references to the dark magic being employed, they finally addressed what lay between them. Theron spoke first, his voice rough with emotion as he admitted what his wolf had recognized from the moment she entered his war room. Lyra closed her eyes against tears she refused to shed and whispered that she knew, that her wolf had screamed the truth at her, but that fate's timing was cruelly ironic given everything else they faced. They stood on opposite sides of the table, two people separated by rank and circumstance, and the weight of responsibilities that seemed designed to keep them apart. Theron told her that if things were different, if he were not a king, and she not needed for her critical gifts, he would court her properly, would prove himself worthy of a mate bond he had never expected to find. Lyra responded that if she were not an Omega healer from an insignificant pack, and he not an Alpha king with a kingdom to save, she would accept that courtship gladly. The honesty between them was painful in its simplicity, an acknowledgement of feelings that could not be fully explored, while crisis consumed them. They agreed without words to set aside the personal for the sake of duty, to focus on stopping the conspiracy before addressing their own impossible situation. It was the mature, responsible decision, and it absolutely broke both their hearts even as they made it. The night before the trial by Moonfire, another well was poisoned. The Southern Creek source, serving one of the largest pack concentrations in the kingdom, turned black with corruption despite increased security measures. 13 more wolves fell ill, including 6 children whose small bodies struggled more than the adults to fight off the toxin's effects. The message was clear. The conspirators were not afraid of the trial, were in fact bold enough to strike even as they faced judgment, and possessed resources that allowed them to act despite intensive surveillance. Theron nearly broke his desk in half when the report came through, his wolf howling for vengeance while his strategic mind calculated how much damage the enemy could still inflict if they remained free. Lyra worked through the night to stabilize the new victims. Her healing gift stretched to its limits as she poured silver light into small bodies fighting for survival, tears streaming down her face as she begged the moon for strength to save them all. Do not forget to like this video if you are invested in Theron and Lyra's journey, and share your theories about who the real traitor might be in the comments below. Dawn broke on the day of the trial by Moonfire, with an ominous red sky that old wolves muttered was a bad omen. The sacred circle lay 3 miles from the palace in a natural clearing that had been used for judgment ceremonies since before the kingdom's founding, a place where the veil between the mortal world and the divine was thinnest. Ancient stones marked the circle's boundary, each carved with runes that predated written language, pulsing with a power that made even the strongest alphas approach with reverence and caution. Theron had ordered every pack in reasonable distance to send representatives to witness the trial, needing his people to see that justice was being served and that he would use every tool available to protect them. By midday, thousands of werewolves lined the hillsides surrounding the circle, their silence heavy with anticipation and dread. The accused were brought forth in silver chains that burned their skin where metal touched flesh, a necessary cruelty to prevent transformation and ensure they faced judgment in human form. Lord Brennan was visibly terrified, his earlier composure shattered by the reality of what he faced. Lady Cordelia maintained her dignity, but her hands trembled slightly as guards positioned her at one of the standing stones. Commander Victor walked to his place with military precision, still silent, still giving nothing away. 2 other suspects had been identified in the final investigation push, lesser nobles whose access and opportunity fit the pattern, both now protesting innocence with increasing desperation as they were secured. Theron took his position at the circle's center, wearing the formal robes of judgment that had been passed down through generations of kings, feeling the weight of his ancestors' expectations pressing down on him. Lyra stood with the healers outside the circle proper, ready to provide aid if needed, but unable to interfere with the divine judgment itself. She had never witnessed a trial by Moonfire, had only read historical accounts that described it in terms both reverent and horrifying. Her gift was stirring uneasily, sensing the building magical pressure as sunset approached, and the full moon prepared to rise. She caught Theron's eye across the distance, and saw the pain there, the burden of a king about to potentially watch people he trusted burn to death, and wished desperately she could go to him, provide comfort, even though nothing could truly ease what he faced. Their bond pulled taut across the space between them, a connection both found, themselves leaning on, even as they maintained their public distance. As the sun touched the horizon, Theron began the ritual invocation in the old tongue, words that had been spoken by kings and chiefs stretching back into prehistory when werewolves first received the moon's blessing. He called upon the moon goddess to witness, to judge, to reveal truth that mortal eyes could not see. The ancient stones began to glow, soft at first, then brighter, silver light that had nothing to do with the knot. Yet risen moon, the air itself seemed to thicken, to press inward on the circle, and Lyra felt power building that made her gift flare involuntarily. This was divine magic, pure and terrifying, answering Theron's call with an intensity that suggested the goddess herself was paying attention to what transpired here. The accused all showed fear now, even Commander Victor's mask cracking as the true nature of what they faced became undeniably real. The moon rose in spectacular fashion, full and silver and impossibly large on the horizon, and the moment its light touched the sacred circle, everything changed. The glow from the stones intensified 1,000-fold, silver fire erupting upward to form a dome over the accused, flames that gave off no heat, but radiated judgment so pure, it made even watching from outside the circle painful. The moonfire swirled around each suspect in turn, testing, seeking, penetrating beyond flesh to examine the truth of souls. Lord Brennan screamed as the flames touched him, but instead of burning, the fire passed through him harmlessly and moved on. The lesser nobles experienced the same, terror giving way to sobbing relief as the moonfire found them innocent and withdrew. Lady Cordelia stood straight as the flames examined her, and after a moment that stretched like eternity, they too passed her by, leaving her shaking but unharmed. Then the moonfire reached Commander Victor, and everything went wrong in ways no one anticipated. The flames touched him and immediately recoiled, the silver light turning black as pitch, corruption radiating from him in waves that made wolves throughout the gathering howl in distress. But Victor was not burning, not being consumed as the guilty should be. Instead, he was transforming, but not into a wolf. His body twisted and grew, bones breaking and reforming, skin darkening to something that looked like shadow-made flesh. His eyes went completely black, and when he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that belonged to something far older and far darker than any werewolf. He had not been possessed, Lyra realized with horror. He had always been this, something wearing a werewolf's shape, but fundamentally other, fundamentally wrong. The silver chains meant to hold him shattered like glass, and chaos erupted as the thing that had been Commander Victor attacked. Theron shifted instantly, his transformation faster than thought, his alpha wolf massive and silver-gray launching itself at the threat, even as he shouted orders for his warriors to protect the civilians. The creature that had been Victor met him in mid-air, and their collision sent shockwaves rippling outward. It was immediately clear this would be no ordinary fight. The shadow creature possessed strength beyond even an alpha's, speed that made it blur, and claws that dripped with the same corruption that had poisoned the wells. Every strike it landed sent black tendrils spreading across Theron's fur, trying to burrow into his flesh, trying to corrupt him as the wells had been corrupted. Theron fought with everything he had, with centuries of alpha breeding and 15 years of combat experience. But he was being overwhelmed, driven back, bleeding from dozens of wounds that were not healing as they should. Lyra watched the battle with her heart in her throat, her healer's instincts screaming at her to intervene even though she had no combat training, no way to hurt something that could stand against an alpha king. But she had other gifts, gifts that suddenly seemed relevant in new ways. If the creature was corrupted, was essentially a physical manifestation of the poison she had been studying, then perhaps her ability to sense and neutralize toxins could be weaponized. It was a desperate theory with no guarantee of success, but watching her mate fighting for his life against impossible odds, Lyra found a courage she had not known she possessed. She ran into the sacred circle, ignoring the screams of those trying to stop her, and thrust her hands into the moonfire itself, drawing its divine power into her gift, amplifying it beyond anything she had attempted before. The sensation was beyond description, beyond pain, beyond ecstasy, pure power flooding through her small frame until she felt she would shatter from the pressure. Her hands blazed with silver light so intense it cast shadows at noon, and she directed it toward the shadow creature with a healer's precision, targeting not to destroy, but to purify. to burn away corruption and leave only truth. The creature shrieked as her power struck it, a sound that made werewolves collapse with hands over ears, and its shadow form began to dissolve, but it fought back, launching itself at Lyra with murderous intent, claws extended to tear her apart before she could finish what she had started. Theron intercepted it mid-lunge, his jaws closing on shadow flesh even as the corruption tried to spread through him, buying Lyra the second she needed to complete her working. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see how this supernatural romance concludes, and hit that like button if this trial has you completely hooked. With a final surge of power that she knew would take everything she had, Lyra pushed her gift to its absolute limit, channeling the Moonfire through herself as a conduit, becoming for one brilliant moment a living bridge between divine and mortal. The silver light exploded outward in a wave that washed over the entire sacred circle, over Theron still locked in combat, over the shadow creature, over everyone and everything present. The corruption could not withstand it. The creature screamed one final time before dissolving completely, not into ash or remains, but simply ceasing to exist, erased by power that denied its fundamental nature. The black tendrils retreating from Theron's wounds reversed and vanished, his injuries beginning to heal properly. The corrupted taint that had lingered in the sacred circle from the creature's presence burned away, leaving everything cleaner, purer than it had been in decades. Lyra collapsed the moment the working completed, her small body simply unable to sustain the massive power she had channeled. Theron was at her side before she hit the ground, having shifted back to human form with no thought for his nudity or the thousands of witnesses, cradling her against his chest as he felt for a heartbeat and found it, thready, but present. She had not destroyed herself, but she had come perilously close, and it would take time for her to recover from an effort that should have killed her outright. The fact that she survived at all spoke to the strength of her wolf, to the mate bond that neither had accepted, but both had relied on in that critical moment, and to the moon's favor, blessing an Omega who had been willing to sacrifice everything to protect her people and her mate. The aftermath of the trial was chaotic, but ultimately successful. With the primary operative destroyed, the rest of the conspiracy began to unravel rapidly. Lady Cordelia, vindicated by the Moonfire but shaken by how close she had come to death, threw herself into investigating the archives with renewed determination and discovered coded messages hidden in ancient texts that revealed the conspiracy's full scope. What had posed as Commander Victor was something called a Void Sworn, a creature created through the darkest rituals of the old wars, designed to infiltrate and corrupt from within. It had killed the real Victor years ago, and taken his place so perfectly that even those closest to him had not detected the deception. The creature had not worked alone, however, and Cordelia's research identified 3 other infiltrators in positions of power throughout the kingdom, all arrested within days, as Theron's forces moved with decisive coordination. The poisoning plot was even more sinister than they had initially understood. Each corrupted well had indeed served as a node in a larger ritual, one designed to sever the werewolf's connection to the moon goddess entirely over the course of a full year. Had it succeeded, the kingdom's wolves would have been transformed into something more like the Void Sworn themselves, losing their humanity, their connection to pack bonds, becoming savage shadows driven only by bloodlust. It was genocide, disguised as random attacks, an attempt to destroy werewolf civilization from within by corrupting the very source of what made them who they were. Discovering how close they had come to catastrophic success made every wolf who understood the implications profoundly grateful for Lyra's gifts and Theron's willingness to invoke the ancient trial. Lyra remained unconscious for 3 days, her body recovering from the massive channeling, while healers watched over her with round-the-clock vigilance. Theron rarely left her side, despite the demands of ruling and coordinating the cleanup of the conspiracy's remnants. He held her hand, spoke to her even though she could not hear, and refused to consider a world where she did not wake up. On the evening of the 3rd day, as the moon rose in its last quarter, Lyra's eyes finally opened. She found Theron slumped in a chair beside her bed, exhausted and still holding her hand, and she squeezed his fingers gently until he startled awake. The relief and joy on his face when he saw her conscious made every moment of pain worthwhile. They did not speak at first, just held each other, king and healer, Alpha and Omega, two souls who had found each other in the midst of chaos and betrayal. When words finally came, they were simple and profound. Theron told Lyra that he loved her, that his wolf had claimed her as mate, and his heart had followed, and that if she would have him, he wanted to spend the rest of his life proving he was worthy of the gift she represented. He acknowledged all the complications, the political difficulties of an alpha king taking an omega mate, the challenges she would face as his queen, but swore he would face them all at her side if she was willing. Lyra smiled through tears and responded that her wolf had chosen him just as surely, that she loved him with an intensity that still frightened her, and that she had learned during their crisis that she was stronger than she had ever believed herself to be. She could face royal politics, could learn to navigate the court, could become the queen the kingdom needed if he would help her and stand with her. Their formal bonding ceremony took place 1 month later under a full moon that shone with particular brilliance, as if the goddess herself approved of the union. All the kingdom's packs sent representatives to witness their alpha king claim his true mate, the Omega healer who had saved them all. It was a magnificent affair, blending traditional bonding rites with the pageantry expected of a royal wedding. But for Theron and Lyra, the only moment that mattered was when they spoke the ancient vows and felt the mate bond snap fully into place, no longer denied or suppressed, but embraced completely. The sensation was overwhelming, a connection that joined their souls at the deepest level, allowing them to feel each other's emotions, to sense each other's presence across any distance, to be truly known by another being, in ways that most wolves could only dream of. Lyra did face challenges as she settled into her role as queen. There were nobles who quietly questioned whether an Omega from an insignificant pack was suitable for the position, who whispered that Theron should have chosen a mate from among the great families to strengthen political alliances. But Lyra had saved the kingdom and possessed gifts that commanded respect even from her detractors, and she approached her new responsibilities with the same dedication she had always brought to healing. She became an advocate for the smaller packs, for those whose voices were rarely heard in the capital, using her position to ensure the kingdom truly served all its people, rather than just the powerful. Theron supported her completely, making it clear to anyone who questioned her that insulting his queen was insulting him, and together they presented a united front that gradually won over even the most skeptical courtiers. 6 months after the bonding, Lyra discovered she was pregnant with their first child, news that brought joy tempered by the very real concerns about Omega pregnancies, which carried higher risks than beta or alpha ones. But Lyra was not just any Omega. Her gifts included an intuitive understanding of her own body, and she approached pregnancy with a healer's knowledge and a mother's determination. Theron was alternately elated and terrified, his protective instincts going into overdrive as he tried to balance supporting his mate with not becoming overbearingly controlling. They navigated it together, learning as they went, and when their daughter, Mai, was born healthy and perfect under a summer moon, both parents wept with relief and joy. They named her Selene, after the moon goddess, and the kingdom celebrated the birth of a princess who carried the bloodlines of alpha strength and omega gifts, a combination that promised great things. The kingdom slowly healed from the trauma of the poisoning conspiracy. The corrupted wells were purified through rituals Lyra developed, combining her healing gifts with traditional moon blessings. And new protections were established that would make infiltration far more difficult in the future. The trials revealed several other minor players in the conspiracy, all dealt with according to law, and reforms were implemented to close the security gaps that had allowed the Voidsworn to operate undetected for so long. Theron's reputation as a king grew stronger, his willingness to invoke the trial by Moonfire, and his success in rooting out the traitors, proving his commitment to justice and his people's safety. He ruled with Lyra at his side, their partnership becoming the model for what a true mate bond could accomplish when both partners brought their full strength to the relationship. Years passed in relative peace, the kind of peace that had to be actively maintained through good governance and constant vigilance, but was possible nonetheless. Theron and Lyra had 2 more children, a son named Aldrich, who inherited his father's alpha presence, and another daughter, Mira, who showed signs of healing gifts even stronger than her mother's. The royal family became a symbol of hope for the kingdom, proof that true mates could overcome any obstacle, and that strength came in many forms. Lyra never lost her compassion or her connection to her healing roots, maintaining a clinic at the palace where any wolf could seek treatment regardless of their rank or ability to pay. Theron never lost his strategic mind or his commitment to justice, but he learned to temper his harder edges. With the empathy Lyra brought to their partnership, becoming not just a strong king, but a wise one. On the 10th anniversary of the trial by Moonfire, they returned to the sacred circle together, standing in the space where their lives had changed so dramatically. The stones still glowed softly in the moonlight, a reminder of the divine power that had revealed truth when mortal methods failed. Theron wrapped his arms around Lyra from behind, resting his chin on top of her head, and reflected on how close they had come to losing everything. The conspiracy could have succeeded, the kingdom could have fallen, and they might never have had the chance to explore the bond between them. But fate and the moon goddess had other plans, bringing them together through crisis and giving them the strength to face horrors that would have broken lesser wolves. Lyra leaned back against her mate's solid warmth and thought about the frightened Omega healer she had been, summoned to the capital with no idea how much her life was about to change. She had found not just her true mate, but her purpose, discovering reserves of courage and power she had not known she possessed. The journey had been terrifying and painful, and absolutely worth every moment. She had helped save her people, had brought new life into the world, and had learned that Omega did not mean weak or lesser, but simply meant a different kind of strength, one the kingdom needed just as much as alpha dominance. Together with Theron, she had proven that the most powerful bonds were those built on mutual respect, genuine partnership, and love deep enough to face any challenge. They stood in the moonlight, king and queen, alpha and omega, 2 halves of a whole that fate had forged through fire and crisis. Their children played in the palace under the watchful eyes of devoted guards. Their kingdom prospered under their joint leadership. The wells ran pure and clear, blessed once again by the moon, and while they knew challenges would always come, that ruling required constant effort and sacrifice, they faced the future together with the confidence that comes from having survived the worst and emerged stronger. The trial by Moonfire had revealed more than just traitors. It had revealed the depth of their bond and the strength they possessed when united. That was a truth no darkness could corrupt, a light that would guide them through whatever storms lay ahead. Thank you for joining us on this journey of betrayal, justice, and supernatural love. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video, share your favorite moments in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more werewolf romance tales that will capture your heart and imagination. Until next time, may the moon light your path, and may you find your true mate when you need them most.